Hi, welcome to another episode of Legal Tuesdays. I am Monica Miller, the Legal Director and Senior Counsel here over at AHA. And on this week's episode of Legal Tuesdays, I'm going to answer a question that came to us through our online complaint form. This was a question that's come up over the years, and it's one in which I actually sent a letter a few weeks back, a 9-page letter to a school district in Texas about. And just today, this is Tuesday, the March 2nd, so you'll be seeing this almost in a week from now, but I'm bringing it up now because it's a recurring issue, and also because, like I said, just today we got this favorable result after I sent a letter. The school district agreed to take appropriate steps that we laid out in the letter, and so no lawsuit is required. But the question is whether schools can have a moment of silence period during the school day, and then if they do, whether it's unconstitutional for a teacher to use that period of time to encourage prayer through statements such as, and this is actually from the letter that I sent on February 23rd to the big public school district in Texas. A teacher had said things during a moment of silence period for kindergartners, saying this is a good time to say a prayer, and that students should go to church if it helps them feel safe and loved. So, and again, this is a public kindergarten class, captive audience during instructional time. So to answer the first question, whether a moment of silence period is allowed, yes, with some caveats. The U.S. Supreme Court actually struck down a moment of silence statute where the purpose behind the statute was undeniably religious. The court had looked through, testimony from state legislators. This was an Alabama case. I know it came out of the 11th Circuit, Wallace versus Jaffrey. So there was a statute basically, and the legislative history showed it very explicitly that the purpose of this statute was to continue a long-standing tradition of prayer based on prior iterations of that statute, based on the fact that school prayer at that school district had been a thing for probably decades. So it was just codifying and twisting the prayer statute so that they could continue a practice, and the Supreme Court then had held no dice. This is just a way to further prayer, and under just the regular, Establishment Clause analysis where we look at purpose, effect, and entanglement, this fails on purpose. There's no secular purpose for continuing prayer in public schools. That being said, if a school never had this history of prayer, if there was no legislative history or, documents and statements confirming a religious intent, and just, a school district happens to want to do a moment of silent period, maybe some yoga, some meditation in the morning for kindergarten students, that alone would be fine. There's nothing religious about being quiet. Of course, when teachers say this is the time for prayer, and while we're at it, you guys should go to church on the weekends, that is unconstitutional and very inappropriate. Parents don't drop their kids off at the public schoolhouse gate to have their beliefs put into question. They don't want their children to be indoctrinated by adults who hold views that are different from the families. That's why, public school is a thing versus parochial school. If you want your kid to learn, exclusively Catholic doctrine, and you don't want them to learn science in the way that it's taught through, the public school curriculum, then those options are still available. The First Amendment precludes public schools from indoctrinating public school children, and even if it's something that seems minor, in the case of this letter that we sent, it was a few, and I'm sure it was more than a few, but what we learned of was through a kindergartner who was fairly new at this school. So, a few comments here and there, that amounts to a constitutional violation. Whether we'd bring something like that to court or not is a different question, and really critically is getting that evidence. It's going to be, your 5-year-old, your 6-year-old's word against a grown-up's. So the more you can make a track record of voicing a complaint, if it's a Zoom and you're there and you can hear it and you witnessed it, that's even better. If these are recorded, most schools, I don't know how many schools are open right now, but here in California, it's I know there's a lot of private schools that are open, and I think some public too. I don't have kids, so not as tuned into the school thing, but nevertheless, pay attention to what your teachers, if your school does have a moment of silence period, whether you're a student or a parent, pay attention to what teachers are saying during this time. Because if they are making religious statements, if they're saying, use this time to meditate and pray, not allowed. Tell us, we'll send a letter, and what we'll get, hopefully, is a response that we got, much like the one today, where the public school district in Texas says, this is the Round Rock Independent School District, by the way. They've been sued before over Establishment Clause violations. I'm familiar with some of the litigation from their school district. So luckily they promptly responded because they probably don't want to go through that again. They said, we have conducted an investigation and we have directed the teacher to refrain from engaging in any behavior that could be perceived as encouraging prayer and or church attendance. That's the kind of thing that we want to hear from legal counsel at these big public school districts. So stay vigilant and contact us if you feel that your rights have been violated.